The first time I ever worked for the Beatles was January '63, and Neil had a terrible cold. He had the flu or something, and he asked me if I'd drive him down to London. And it was snowing heavy and everything. And I took time off from work and drove him down to London for like 4 days.
I do remember, however, one moment, and we were going up the motorway and the windscreen got knocked out by a pebble. So Mal just put his hat on backwards, punched the windscreen out completely and like drove, you know. But of course, this was winter in Britain and it was freezing. And because it was fog, he was having to look for the curb all the time, all the way up to Liverpool. You know, it's like 200 miles.
Hand over to Scotland, a tour, and it was that freezing cold winter, that really bitterly cold winter.
Like a couple of the gigs, the accounts, and the edited,
John came home from Hamburg in the new year. It was wonderful to see him. He was brimming with excitement, relieved that Mimi and I hadn't killed each other, and poured out stories of what he'd been up to.
From Hamburg, terrible winter, went up to Scotland, where one gig, 20 people showed up apparently.
So we were very, very cold. And remember what we did was we lay on each other.
With a bottle of whiskey. And then when the one on the top got so cold, he was like, hypothermia was setting in. It was his turn to get on the bottom. And then, you know, we'd warm each other up that way and keep swigging the whiskey.
It was quite an image, you know, if, you'd think, you know, people think stardom and it's glamorous, you know. There's us freezing, lying literally on top of each other.
Oh, yeah, we were tight. That was one thing to be said about us. We were really tight, you know, as friends. We could argue a lot amongst ourselves, but we were very, very close to each other.
I mean, they were all terrible teasers. They all made the same sort of bad jokes. They poked fun at you the whole time. In that way, they were very similar. And I did think in those days, certainly, they liked each other tremendously. I think they were really good friends.
I remember going at lunchtime from the factory in Worcester there would be lunchtime things, like little dance hall, Victor Sylvester's and little old dance hall-y places, little things. And you'd go along in the lunch break and they'd play records and you could just hang out a little bit for an hour in your lunch break. And Please Please Me was just, blotting out the airwaves, and it was just ridiculous.
And it was what you did in those days, because there were no big venues for them to play like 50 or 100,000 people. There were no Glastonburys for them to just go and do one gig a year and have it on television and everything. They had to go out and play every town in order to be seen by people. Television was the other way, of course, and they began to go on TV. But they would go, everywhere they went, they would light a fire.
And your first real big TV came along then. You'd done Granada TV before, but the first real biggie was Thank Your Lucky Stars.
Yeah, that was a great show. And really what I loved about that show, and what all of us in the group loved, was that it was a miming show. And we'd never mimed, so it was like a new art.
The classic is when John Lennon offered to write me a song in the canteen at Thank You Lucky Stars. Their first television was Thank You Lucky Stars, to my knowledge, and they'd had Love Me Do, and they were about to do Please Please Me, so they weren't known for their writing. And I was with my manager. We were in the canteen chatting, and John was there talking to us. I suppose Ringo and them were in the queue getting their grub. And we were talking about songs and stuff, and John Lennon said, we'll write your song, really keen, it's almost grabbing your lapels. And I just didn't think anything of it. It was in a sort of incestuous thing with Joe Meek. Everything was in-house, he kept it all in-house. He didn't even take on songs by the writers of the day, let alone some new guy from a band he'd never heard of, who've never had one minor hit. So I didn't actually turn it down, but we just thought nothing of it. So ever since then I thought, I'd have had Bad to Me, Do You Want to Know a Secret? I've had all these hit songs.
But they ended up being signed by VJ Records at the beginning of January, and
who certainly got their money's worth with those songs.
Well,
How many different versions?
Well, I mean, they only had a certain number of tracks, but they did as much as they could with them while they could.
The first time, as I say, I drove down to London with them, and they were just about to break then, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But everywhere we went, there was always 5 of us.
Yeah.
Even though I was just standing in for the regular old managing Neil. It was always, that's what really endeared me to them at the beginning. They included me in the family. So I never felt that I worked for the Beatles. I always felt I worked with the Beatles, which is really great.
We wanted to be on the Saturday Morning Club Brian Matthews did, which is a huge show. And the great thing I loved about the show was you'd wake up after your week of school or whatever it was, and you'd lie in. And I had a radio by my bed, and I'd lie in till about 11. Great, the most delicious lie-in ever of your life, you know, those teenage lie-ins, Saturday. Lie-in, feeling great. Turn the radio on, and this program would be on there still for another hour. Saturday Club. So that we really wanted to be on that. We knew that there were people listening to that. It was a huge audience.
We did a lot of tracks that were never recorded on record for Saturday Club. All the stuff we'd been doing at the Cavern or Hamburg and that. But there's some good stuff then. They were well recorded too.
I was writing for the Daily Mail at the time. I was doing a pop column, which was rather a boring job at the time because pop was incredibly boring. And pop singers in interviews were even more boring than you could imagine. They always had a PR man or woman hanging over their shoulder in case they said anything interesting, and then they'd tell you, shut up, you can't print that. And I got this Xeroxed piece of paper saying, we are Beatles, Beatles with an A. Why Beatles, Beatles with an A? Because a man came onto us on a flaming pie and said, you should be Beatles, Beatles with an A and all this. And I thought, bloody hell, I'd really like to meet the guy who wrote that. So I rang up and said, yeah, I'd like to interview the Beatles. And, nothing easier at that time, of course. And then I went to this hotel to interview them, and they'd given me all this PR stuff about, and it sort of said, what is your favourite colour? Black. And that. It was very lugubrious, sort of very funny kind of handout. It was parody stuff. And they were very funny to meet. I mean, they were great. They were full of fun and interest and liveliness and intelligence. And we talked, and John and Paul told me about a play they were trying to write about Jesus Christ come back to Liverpool. And I think it was going to be called Pilchard. And I thought this was wonderful. I'd like to see that play. I'd still like to see the play. And, it was just a lot of fun. We had whiskey and Coke, I remember. And I think the important thing about the Beatles was, to begin with, was the fun. Pop hadn't been fun for some time.
Misery, what has been bad? Misery. It was a kind of a John song more than a Paul, but it was written together.
we never stopped anywhere. You know, if we were in Elgin on a Thursday and we needed to be in like Portsmouth on Friday, you would just drive. No, we didn't know how to stop this van. Neil would drive and there'd be the passenger seat, and then the three of us would sit in the bench seat, whichever three. But for the rest of us, we're still on this bench seat, which is pretty miserable. And we would just go everywhere in this van. And the kitten, you know, and the amps, everything would fit in it. But some nights it was so foggy that you would be doing it 1 mile an hour. And you'd still just keep going. It was like, you know, we were like homing pigeons. You just had to keep getting home.